Hey everyone, today we're going to dive into a pretty provocative idea, one that's drawn from ancient texts but points right at modern Israel. It's called the 70-year test, and it basically reframes history as this critical test against a ticking clock. So let's get right into it. So let's just start with the big, startling question at the heart of all this. What if the existence of the state for over 70 years isn't some final achievement, but more like a probationary period? A conditional opportunity that actually has a deadline. All right, so let's really break down this core concept, this idea of the state itself as a trial, as a kind of ticking hourglass with a very, very specific purpose. So, according to this viewpoint, the return to the land was never just about creating a high-tech nation or even just about physical survival. No, it was about one thing and one thing only, fulfilling a mission to build a house for God. And this isn't just something to do, it's the very condition for being here. And this is where it gets really interesting, because temple here doesn't just mean a building made of stone and mortar. The mission, as it's described, is to build a spiritual dwelling place, a society, a collective consciousness, where divinity can feel at home, both inside us and in the world we build together. Okay, so to really feel the urgency behind this whole 70-year clock thing, we've got to go back in time. We have to look at the historical blueprint for this idea, which is rooted in the words of the prophet Jeremiah and, crucially, the way Daniel understood them. You know, we tend to think of Jeremiah as this prophet of doom and gloom, right? But according to this reading, he was basically laying out the terms of a contract. And the terms were brutally simple. Uphold your side of the deal and you get to stay. Break it and you're out. The land was always conditional. And this timeline really lays out that historical pattern for us. When Jeremiah prophesied a 70-year exile, it wasn't supposed to be a passive waiting period. Daniel, sitting in Babylon, got it. He understood it was an active deadline. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was ticking down to a moment of decision, a trigger for action. Right, so this is absolutely key. For Daniel, that 70-year prophecy wasn't just ancient history. It was an instruction manual for the future. He knew that if the people didn't step up, pray, and actually act to go back and rebuild, the opportunity would just be lost. They'd simply fade away into history. Okay, so now let's bring it all into the present day. And this is where you start to see this powerful and honestly pretty uncomfortable parallel being drawn with our own time. A big part of this argument rests on this classic idea of a generational cycle. You have the first generation, the founders, who are driven by the mission. Then comes the second generation, who remembers the sacrifices. But by the third generation, which this argument says is us, that original why starts to get fuzzy, and that's when you become vulnerable. And what's the consequence of forgetting? Well, it's pretty stark. The source material basically argues that the biggest existential threat isn't coming from outside enemies, but from a kind of internal amnesia. When you forget the reason you're here in the first place, the whole project becomes hollow and risks just disappearing. Not with a bang, but like smoke. And this is where the argument really ramps up, drawing these direct lines from the internal problems that led to destruction in the past to the challenges we see in society today. So look at this comparison. It's meant to make those ancient warnings feel, well, super current. What was once called idolatry, this view argues, now looks like the worship of money and power, which distracts from the real spiritual purpose. The old cries against social injustice sound a lot like the conversations we're having about today's growing economic gaps. And the baseless hatred that took down the Second Temple, you can see its reflection in the deep political and social divisions that threaten to tear us apart today. So the takeaway here is a really stark warning. The biggest danger isn't at the borders, but in the heart of the nation itself. The foundation is being eaten away by disunity, by a loss of shared purpose, by a kind of spiritual emptiness. The house, this view contends, is rotting from the inside out. But look, this whole idea isn't about saying we're all doomed. Far from it. This is where everything pivots from a dark warning to an empowering call to action. A call for a radical change in how we think and what we do. And that's the essential question, right? If the diagnosis is this serious, what on earth is the prescription? So now the focus shifts completely from the problem to the solution. First up, let's talk about what not to do, because the message here is pretty clear. Passivity is the enemy. Sitting around and waiting for some miracle to happen, not an option. Making excuses that the timing isn't perfect, nope. Pushing the responsibility onto someone else, that's seen as a total failure to answer the call. So what's the path forward? Well, it's not some complex 10-point political plan. It's actually much more personal, and it's immediate. It starts with just waking up, realizing the test is real. Then it's about reigniting that desire to actually fulfill the mission. From there, it's about each of us taking personal responsibility for our part. And finally, you start right now, today. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question that goes way beyond historical analysis and becomes a direct personal challenge. Is this 70-year clock a prophecy of doom, or is it a final, urgent invitation to build something meaningful? According to this view, the choice is ours.